Everybody, it's 1:45. Welcome back to the 2020 New England Resource Sharing Conference. My name is Paul Kissman from the Massachusetts Board of Library Commissioners, and we're sort of starting to get into the home stretch here a little bit. We have one more panel after our next speaker, so hold on to your hats. I hope your blood pressure hasn't dropped due to due to your lunch. So the next session is session number 4, Expanding Patron Identity, Issues, Options, and Opportunities with Daniel Dazza Greenwood. For those of you who were here earlier, I get to rinse, shake, and repeat for the housekeeping rules. I'll go over those really quickly and then introduce Dazza. This session is being recorded. By participating, it denotes your consent to being recorded. You are welcome to say hello in chat, to share your reactions and resources, keep the conversation going, but please use the Q&A feature to ask questions of the presenter so we can track them easily. This is the only place that we look for presenter questions. As you interact with each other today, please remember that this is a safe space for everyone. Please use the chat and Q&A features respectfully. Feel free to share about the conference on social media using the hashtag SharingVisions2020. Presenter resources and session recordings will be made available on the conference site, and we put that information up in the chat. Finally, a conference evaluation will be emailed to all attendees the day after the event. We encourage everyone to fill one out, and we look forward to your feedback. So now, back to business. This next session is for a half an hour. It runs from 1:45 to 2:15. This afternoon, I have the pleasure of introducing Daniel Dazza Greenwood. He wears multiple hats. Sometimes he seems to wear a specific hat for a specific event. He works at the intersection of law and computational technology. Rather than trying to invent something myself, I'm going to read off Dazza's blurb. Dazza is a researcher at MIT Media Lab and a lecturer at Connection Science at the MIT School of Engineering, where he is advancing the field of computational law and building out the law.mit.edu research portfolio. And I want to particularly bring your attention to MIT's Computational Law Report, which is a new online publication. Dazza is also the founder of Civics.com, a boutique provider of professional consultancy services for legal technologies, automated transactions, data management, and technology strategy. Now, part of what we wanted to do today was to offer you a sort of smorgasbord of programs. Some of them might be more practical, such as the upcoming panel discussion about delivery and sustainability issues, and others more theoretical and thought-provoking, such as Dazza's presentation. Now, I personally became interested in digital identity and identity management issues about 15 years ago. We were trying to figure out how to lower barriers to our statewide database offerings. Now, identity management as a discrete area was a completely new concept to me. It just sounded like jargon. But we soon began to grapple with questions like, how can users have more control over their own identity? And what about more complex relationships when a user might have relationships with multiple libraries or institutions? And why use a library identity at all? I mean, why a patron record? Why not something else, such as a civic identity? So we looked at a federated identity solution like Shibboleth or Athens or Open Athens, which many of you may be familiar with. We ended up implementing geolocation for barrier-free access, as many states have done. I think Connecticut got there a little ahead of us. It's very effective, but it's also a very blunt instrument. It's a one-size-fits-all solution. It's got no finesse. We can't allow you to see different things based on your role or the type of user you are or what kind of organization you're affiliated with. We looked at other authentication and authorization technology stacks as well, including social login plugins and APIs. So for instance, many of you have probably logged into websites via your Google ID or Twitter or LinkedIn or Facebook. So we wanted to look at the risks around doing something along those lines. But a lot of the technologies over the last 10 or 15 years have been left by the side of the road, and you've probably never even heard of half of them. But even today, and to my mind at least, we're still locked into an older model of thinking about identity in the context of libraries, and of course, the related security and privacy issues. For all of these reasons, I'm really excited about having Dazza with us today. So please welcome Dazza Greenwood.
Thank you so much, Paul, for that gracious introduction. And I'm especially glad that you took a moment to provide a little context about what digital identity means in relation to libraries and serving patrons and serving borrowers and just operations. So it's true, this talk is intentionally somewhat high level and theoretical, as Paul said, but this is theory about practice and a very real and important service mechanism when the library services are expressed online and digitally through networks. How do you achieve some kind of identity for the various users of the network? Ordinarily, that in my career, I guess I'll provide a little context. I started off as a lawyer in the public sector in the state government of Massachusetts, where I was legal counsel for technology in the 90s. And we had to deal a lot with making sure our employees could log into different systems, making sure citizens could log into a number of systems, and those have really increased over time. And dealing with identity in other, somewhat more subtle ways, like identity proofing people at the I was going to say Department of Motor Vehicles, but I'll just show my native stripes there and say the Registry of Motor Vehicles, as we name it here in the Commonwealth. And for professional licensure, I was fingerprinted in 95, I guess, when I became a member of the Bar Association. So, it's not that esoteric to think about identity and logging in. This has been part of our culture and part of the economy and part of the public sector for a long, long time. The reason why we want to talk about it again today, in part, is because there's a trend afoot now related to the prevalence of the use of online identity that is provisioned from social media and from other web giants like Google, acting as the provider of an identity that people use to, as Paul foreshadowed a little bit, to log in. And so largely and that's kind of coupled with this other context of the open web. And so every individual application and platform does not have a hermetically sealed user account system. In fact, everyone I'm sure has noticed that it's very easy to use one identity to log into from one system to log into another system, and then to use that identity to authorize access to resources, not just for login, but like you could share your tweets with Google Sheets to add another tweet every time you make one, or you could open up your Dropbox to Evernote. All of these interoperable integrations in the open web, in the consumer world, are driven by this individual identity protocol called OAuth. So I want to and I want to show you a little bit about what that is, and then extrapolate to what that could mean for libraries actually, I'll do the spoiler right now, in the context of this void that exists for what I'm going to just call civic identity. Or in other words, identity that's doesn't exist, in the confines of your consumer relationship with Google or Amazon, but exists and is really sourced from you as an individual person, as a resident, a citizen, a patron. Yeah. And yet there's no there to there's no mechanism or method to express that identity or to utilize it. And this gap, which I'll discuss in a moment and give some examples of, is being just filled like a vacuum by identity that does exist, but it's out of context. And this is creating some conflicts and some bad fits. Think surveillance capitalism, for example, and think, you know, think about just the basic alignment of people's expectations with what they actually get when they try to extend and bend the use of identity for a commercial transaction to other systems. And so there's one of the questions is what is the gap and how might it be filled? So so now I'm going to go back and fill in some of those dots. I'm just going to share my desktop. Paul, can you see this slide? Great.
Yes.
Okay. So the original approach to all of this, from way back when basically computers were mainframes, is a username and a password. And that's still very prevalent. The current approach that Paul mentioned is this way to decouple, in a sense, the identity provider from the identity using application or system. And that's like when you log in with an identity and an account from one system into another. At the enterprise level, SAML, or security assertion markup. Wait a second. Geez, I've just munged the acronym. I used to live in SAML. It's been a few years. What does SAML stand for again? Do you remember? Security?
I think you're right. Security assertion markup language.
Language, that's what I was missing, was the L. Thanks. Markup language. And it's basically this sort of protocol that provides this structured text that includes, the identity account and, the source of the identity, what the credentials include, and it allows systems to basically connect directory servers like Microsoft Active Directory or LDAP or X500 or whatever their directory server is that allows them to do user management and account management from one system. You can use that to log into another system. It's very popular in large enterprises and in government and with libraries. MIT uses Athena still, I think, or at least we were part of that network at one point for interlibrary authentication, and that was a dialect of SAML that group agreed to use. SAML is not used for individuals, like in our role as consumers, for example, or account holders in an app that you might have on your mobile phone in your individual capacity, not your employee capacity, say. The standard there is called OAuth. And just so you've heard it, so I'm not derelict in my duty as a digital identity speaker, there's something on the horizon. I don't know whether it will make it into the mainstream or not, but it's being called self-sovereign identity, which takes this idea of user-centered identity management and ownership to its logical extreme. It's based on a kind of a public key cryptography, and the only real implementations right now exist on public open blockchains, when it basically allows you to use your blockchain wallet and the private key that is at the center of that wallet that allows you to authorize and authenticate transactions, to instead use that to do things like to log in or to digitally sign something. And they call that self-sovereign because we generate the keys ourselves on the wallet, and they're not being provided to us from the blockchain bank or the government using blockchain. It's sourcing from individuals. And so it's considered to be a pure expression of user-centered ownership of identity. But I want to dwell upon this OAuth protocol specifically because it is very widely used. It's been around for many years. It's a stable, standard, well understood and not that difficult, honestly, to apply technical standard. And what it looks like, oops, I can't expand this. This is how it kind of touches most people with one of these buttons where you could kind of choose your identity provider. It does a kind of redirect back with a little iframe back to their identity service where you can then use your username and password. So, we haven't vanquished those altogether, although you might be able to use Touch ID or face recognition in some cases instead of the username and password, but you authenticate yourself according to whatever the process is for your identity provider. And then it provides this little authorization code, you can think of it as, to the request to the other site that you're trying to use your identity to log in with. And that's more or less how it works. This is just a kind of high level, but actually pretty accurate swim lane diagram that shows what the authorization grant flow is. So that's kind of what it looks like, just so you've seen. If anyone wants to learn more about this, definitely contact me. I'm happy to talk you through it and to provide resources. So the question is, what if, let's go back here, what if one of these little buttons was your library or library network or a network of networks of libraries? Why am I asking that? Well, partly because there may be some practical potential value propositions for adopting OAuth for libraries to use to log into your network and your applications, and the applications kind of connected to your applications that you may use, like for, this is where I'm a little bit out of my depth, but for things like maybe you have access, like at MIT Library, we can log into other catalogs, for example, and we can log into subscription journals, and we can log into certain music sites and things like that as part of arrangements that our library has. Perhaps you have such arrangements. This is a dead easy way to allow a very quick onboarding of such arrangements. But outside of existing library operations, what about cross enterprise integration opportunities in the public sector? So I know I was in town meeting in Lexington for some years, and we were always thinking about ways, or we were starting at that point to think about ways for that we could start to connect our municipal services, and having each one build out their website and think about how to do login was kind of a pain. Even doing a login that was town-wide was somewhat complicated. If there was a way to have a reusable identity, that would be great. Who in the town government touches the citizens and provides applications to them and would be maybe trusted to be an identity provider? Maybe not the tax assessor, maybe not others, but libraries have many of the criteria that I think exist for a trustworthy identity provider, especially given the privacy and the regard for the rights and the centeredness on people with memberships, I think you'd call it, at the library. Could you use a library network issued ID to log into other public sector services? Could they pay into a small fund for that to reduce, and so we don't always duplicate all of the staff time and license fees for these systems? Could it actually be a revenue center for libraries potentially? And then this is the part that I think, and we're getting more theoretical, that I think is very interesting, that I think is thought-provoking and worth beginning to think about now near the end of 2020, which is what about the rest of the world? Like, who provides the identity for people that's really their identity, and it doesn't exist, is not owned and controlled by entities that may have interests that are really adverse to that individual, maybe commercial interests or other political interests, for example, and that may have an idea of what it means to have a long-term commitment to archiving and to continuity of service in a way that's designed for people. Libraries are a really good example of an institution where people can already come in person to create an account. They could come in person to update an account. It provides that nice integration between the physical and the virtual. They're dispersed, and there is, I don't think I'm getting too far out of school here by saying there is a need to continue to adapt to this change from the physical and paper world to an online networked world. Could this be one of the ways that libraries remain relevant and in fact remain central in the civic square and to the body politic? And could that have beneficial effects in terms of the direction things are going with so-called surveillance capitalism, and this idea that if you're not paying for a product, you probably are the product with these online services. And really the whole business model is monetizing all of the direct and indirect information that can be derived from where you're logging in and how long your sessions are and other kind of activity and behavior that it can be gleaned from this. Well, we know we don't trust these people who have shareholder value at heart to have individuals' interests be primary, like it's actually breaks their fiduciary duty. Who has a fiduciary duty to individuals? Who's been willing to stick their neck out to protect the privacy of individuals in terms of their borrowing history, for example, and to continue providing an important touch point and gathering point for our citizens? The equivalent of the public forum that was just absolutely central to cities of the past and remains a need for civilization going forward. Where is that done in cyberspace? Right now, cyberspace is like trying to camp out in the lobby of a retail store, or or maybe like being on a public sidewalk. But where's the place for people? Of, by, and for people. Maybe public libraries. So that's the idea that we wanted to put forward for conversation and questions and objections, debate, or just unthinking absolute agreement. That is an option. Or thoughtful absolute agreement. Maybe that's even better.
Okay. For anybody who wants to riff on what Dazza has said or ask a question, please use the Q&A box. I just want to react to a couple of different things. I come from a mix of idealistic and very pragmatic thinking about this space, because we've been, as I said in my intro, we've sort of been grappling with it for a long time. When we did our risk assessment for social login, using things like Google and Twitter to log into various kinds of library services, what we discovered was that OAuth, which was behind all of this, was pretty good at firewalling information that you did not want to share with Google or Twitter from them. So if you're using library, it created a way for you as the user to say, I really don't want to share all of this stuff with somebody like Google. But in order to actually implement something like this, your typical state or public library doesn't really have the technological wherewithal to build a system. It has to come from somewhere else. And I think the conclusion we came to after a year and a half of looking at this was there are third-party vendors that can do things like create connectors to 15, 18, 20 different kinds of login providers. But then those third-party solutions own your data, and then they can resell that data. So we didn't want to give up control of library data to third-party vendors who would take kind of the technological burden off of our backs. But by talking to you today, it kind of brings back this whole concept into an area that we should be reconsidering. The other thing I wanted to mention was, there have been a couple of attempts to do things like city identities. I think Boston actually tried it with their school identity, public school card and their library card, and they tried to work it into the MBTA, the public transportation system. I don't believe that project is still ongoing, but it was a really appealing concept. Yeah.
That was in the Menino administration, One Card, I think we called it,
Right.
with the Mayor's Office of New Urban Mechanics. They were so great, but sorry to interrupt, but yes, that did happen. And just if I could distinguish just one thing about that, is that was very much based on starting with the card and staying with the card. And so the question is, could we just have one card instead of, especially with these kids that had like their, neighborhood what was a community center card, the library card, the MBTA card, the school ID, and other cards as well. And they're all being issued by different library card manifestations of the city. Could we not just issue them one card? It turned out that it's actually, card specifications and the vendors and the readers and that the physical infrastructure is not inconsiderable. And there were some other issues as well. Um, I spent a lot of my career consolidating network identities that zeroes out all that issue of trying to focus on the physical card and carry that forward as the organizing artifact. Once you have things digital, they are much more capable of being basically them being interoperable and allowing for integrations very gracefully and very rapidly. There's still some mapping and agreements that have to happen for sure, but a lot of the challenges disappear when we look at it being born digital and then evolving how gracefully we can govern and provide and operate a digital identity. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, that's great. No, there's something just came in on chat because it was from a panelist. Are there any places outside the US looking at this and piloting, or is there any place in the US? And I'll just glom onto that by saying there were some efforts at the federal level about 5 or 6 years ago with was it Open ID or Open Identity? I always get them mixed up. Do you know if anything's still going on?
Um, so I was involved in a couple of things. There was something big in the United Kingdom in God 2012, 2013, where they in that case, they're actually looking to use SAML. OAuth was still a little bit new then to allow basically a one digital identity to kind of like rule them all in the UK. So for your public benefits and for your taxes and then all of these different systems. And the idea though was to allow non-governmental entity to provide them and to have there be almost like a marketplace of competitors that could provide citizens their IDs is one of the ways to sort of allow checks and balances. The UK Post Office won the bid. One of the was part of the group after a public tender, they call them. We had some American companies, PayPal, Verizon were on the team. Some others, there were some other large UK-based companies that were there as well. And some of these citizen-centered identity companies. I think MyDex was one. They would be self-sovereign ID by today's standards. But at the end of the day, and I never really got clarity on why it didn't work. I think partly it may have been the question was, or at least the way you posed the question was, are there prototypes or things happening now? This was very much was a top-down, big government, population-wide for the United Kingdom thing, and that there's a lot of risks inherent in that. I've always just assumed that if we could do a ultimate causal breakdown of why that didn't work, that we might find the issue they tried to do too much too fast without interim points. There are any number of governments that will accept externally issued identity credentials. You could log in with Google, for example, and log in with Twitter for various, mostly like public information, low stakes, low risk, low harm kind of systems. But the real question here is, can you have I would say, public sector or quasi-public sector issued identity that citizens could use themselves to log in elsewhere? Like that's the shift. And I'm sure there must be, I'm not aware of it. And now that time has marched on, 8-10 years with OpenID Connect and ever more refined and easy to use implementations of OAuth 2, the cost for implementing it is quite low now. It's already part of a lot of systems. Everyone knows developers know how to build it and to use it. To become an identity provider is not cost less, but it's very, very low cost and very easy to maintain over a long period. There may be an advantageous gap in the market at this point that libraries could potentially fill.
Okay, we are actually running out of time,
Oh,
and we have a few more questions in the Q&A panel. I think what I'm going to do is take a copy of those questions, and they can be we can find a way to get them answered after the fact and share them back with the attendees. Hopefully that is possible, because we do need to keep on schedule. I also want to mention, I did want Dazza to, because this has nothing to do with this program, but when I was banging around on his law.mit.edu website, I noticed that Dazza and his colleagues are working on a contact tracing framework that deals with issues about security and privacy, that based on what we see coming into our agency on almost a daily basis would be of incredibly great interest to the library community. So I'll share that link out as well, if you don't mind.
no, please do law.mit.edu and just navigate to our special release on COVID-19. And you'll see a bunch of stuff there now, privacy principles and a playbook. But check back again in a week or two, and we'll have our next point release. I think it's 1.4. And we're about to put a whole audit there, and everything's Creative Commons. So I hope that you find it useful.
Okay, thank you very much, Dazza. So what happens next? We're going to take a 10-minute break, and we will return with the final formal session of the day, a 3-state panel discussing sustainability issues in statewide delivery systems. And that session will start promptly at 2:25 p.m. Thank you very much.